Welcome back to Mr. Midnight. Tonight, we're heading to Alaska, a place where winter darkness lasts 20 hours a day and the cold can kill you before you even realize you're in danger. But here's the thing about Alaska that nobody tells you. The cold and darkness aren't the scariest parts. We've got 7 true stories tonight from people who were just trying to make a living during the brutal Alaskan winter. A grocery store worker who saw something at 2 a.m. that made him quit on the spot. A delivery driver who found a building that vanished by morning. And 5 others who encountered things in the frozen darkness that they still can't explain. Some of these people moved thousands of miles away. Some never worked night shifts again. And one of them isn't sure if they're still completely human anymore. If you're new to Mr. Midnight, smash that subscribe button and hit the bell, because we dive into the darkest true stories that'll keep you up at night. Now turn off your lights, get comfortable, and let's find out what's really lurking in Alaska's endless winter nights. Trust me, by the end of this video, you'll understand why some jobs just aren't worth the money. My name is Tyler Matthews, and I've been working the overnight stock crew at Safeway in Wasilla, Alaska for 3 years now. I started this job right after high school to pay for my classes at Matsu Community College. The pay isn't great, $15 an hour, but the hours work perfect with my school schedule. I go to classes during the day and stock shelves from midnight to 8 in the morning. Most people think working alone in a grocery store at night would be creepy, but I actually liked it. It was quiet, peaceful even. Just me, one other stalker named Marcus, and Jim the security guard in this big empty building. We'd put on music, chat while we worked, and get through our shift lists without any customers bothering us. The work was simple: unload the delivery trucks, stock the shelves, rotate the old products to the front. Nothing complicated. Wasilla gets pretty cold in the winter, especially in March when we still have snow on the ground. Our store sits right at the edge of town, with thick woods behind the loading dock. During my 3 years there, I'd gotten used to hearing animals moving around outside at night. Moose, mostly, but sometimes bears coming out of hibernation. Alaska wildlife is just part of life here. But March 3rd, 2024 was different. We'd been having problems for about 2 weeks with animals getting into the building somehow. Every morning, when the day shift arrived, they'd find torn food packages scattered around the store. Cereal boxes ripped open, soup cans with bite marks, packages of meat with the plastic torn off. At first, our manager Dave thought it was raccoons or maybe a bear getting through the damaged loading dock door. The lock on that door had been broken for months, and corporate kept saying they'd send someone to fix it, but they never did. The weird thing was how the animals were getting in and out without us noticing. Jim walked around the store every hour doing security checks, and Marcus and I were always moving between aisles stocking shelves. You'd think we'd see a bear or raccoons running around, but we never did. We'd just find the mess in the morning. Jim started saying he'd seen large shapes moving in the parking lot during his outside patrols. But here's the strange part. He said they walked upright like people, instead of moving on all fours like normal animals. When I asked him about it, he'd get this worried look and say the shapes were too big to be people, but they definitely weren't walking like bears either. I figured Jim was just tired. Security guards work long, boring shifts, and your mind can play tricks on you when you're tired and it's dark outside. Plus, Jim was in his 60s and probably needed glasses, but was too proud to admit it. I didn't think much about his stories. Around 2 in the morning on March 3rd, I was stocking the cereal aisle like always. We'd gotten a big shipment of breakfast stuff, and I was trying to fit all the new boxes onto shelves that were already pretty full. I had my earbuds in, listening to music while I worked. The store was quiet, except for the humming of the freezers and the background music they always play, even when we're closed. That's when I heard the automatic doors at the front of the store open, with their usual electronic beep. I pulled out my earbuds and listened. The doors beeped again, like someone was walking through them. But that was impossible. We were closed, and those doors were supposed to be locked from the inside. Dave always made sure to lock them before he left at night. I put down the box of cornflakes I was holding and walked toward the front of the store. My footsteps echoed on the hard floor, louder than usual because the store was so quiet. When I reached the end of the cereal aisle, I could see the front entrance area. There were 3 figures standing just inside the doors, near the shopping cart area. At first, I thought they were customers who had somehow gotten in despite our closed signs and locked doors. Maybe Dave forgot to lock up properly, or maybe they were employees from another store who needed something. It happens sometimes. Managers have keys to other stores in the district. But as I got closer, I realized something was wrong with the way they were standing. They were hunched over, with their arms hanging down much longer than normal human arms should hang. Their clothes looked torn and dirty, like they'd been living outside for months. In the dim store lighting, I could see their hair was messy and matted. "Excuse me, we're closed," I called out, trying to sound polite but firm. "You'll need to come back when we open at 6. All three heads turned toward me at exactly the same time, like they were connected somehow. That's when I saw their faces, and my stomach dropped. Their faces looked human, but their eyes reflected the store's fluorescent lights like an animal's eyes do in the dark. You know how a cat's eyes glow green when you shine a light on them? It was exactly like that, but these were human-shaped faces. Instead of responding to my voice like normal people would, they started sniffing the air. Actually sniffing, like dogs trying to track a scent. One of them opened their mouth and made a sound that was half human speech and half animal growl. It sounded like they were trying to talk but had forgotten how. I backed away and reached for my radio to call Jim. Every night shift employee carries a two-way radio so we can communicate with security. I pressed the button and said, "Jim, we've got some people in the store who shouldn't be here. Can you come to the front?" No response. I tried again. "Jim, are you there? I need you up front right now." Still nothing. The radio was working. I could hear the static when I pressed the button, but Jim wasn't answering. The three figures started moving toward me, but they weren't walking normally. They were moving on their knuckles like apes, using their hands to help them walk. Their legs seemed too weak to support their weight properly. As they got closer, I could smell them. A wild, animal smell mixed with something rotten. I turned and ran toward the back office. My keys were jangling as I ran, and I could hear them following behind me, not running, but moving fast in that weird knuckle-walking way. I reached the office and tried to unlock the door, but my hands were shaking so bad I dropped the keys twice. Finally, I got the door open and slammed it behind me. I immediately went to the office phone and dialed 911. The phone rang once, then made a weird crackling sound and went dead. I tried again, same thing. The storm outside must have knocked down phone lines. I remembered the security monitors in the office. There were 12 screens showing different areas of the store. I turned them on and couldn't believe what I was seeing. There were more figures coming through the loading dock in the back. A lot more. At least a dozen people were moving through the store. But they weren't shopping or stealing things like normal break-in criminals would. They were examining everything with their hands and noses, like animals investigating new territory. I watched one figure pick up a can of tomato soup and bite directly through the metal with their teeth. The can crumpled like paper, and red soup spilled everywhere. Another one was using their fingernails, which looked more like claws, to tear open cardboard boxes and smell what was inside. These weren't people anymore. I don't know what they were, but they had once been human. I could tell because they still wore clothes and had human-shaped bodies, but everything about how they moved and acted was animal-like. On the monitors, I watched them communicate with each other through hand gestures and quiet grunting sounds. They were working together with intelligence, but like a pack of wild animals. Some of them were gathering food, others were exploring different aisles, and a few were watching the exits like guards. I needed to find Jim. I looked at the monitor showing the break room and saw him lying on the floor next to the coffee machine. He wasn't moving. I couldn't tell if he was dead or just unconscious, but I had to check on him. I opened the office door very carefully and listened. I could hear them moving around the store, but they seemed to be focused on the front aisles. I crept down the hallway toward the break room, staying close to the wall and trying not to make any noise. Jim was lying on his side with his eyes closed, but I could see his chest moving up and down. He was alive. There were strange scratch marks on both his arms. Not deep cuts, but perfectly parallel lines like claw marks. When I shook his shoulder gently, he didn't wake up. That's when I heard scratching at the office door behind me. They had found where I'd been hiding. The scratching sound was exactly like what you'd hear if a big dog was trying to get through a wooden door. I couldn't stay here. The only place I could think to hide was the walk-in freezer. It had a thick metal door that locked from the inside, and there was a safety release so you couldn't get trapped. I picked up Jim under his arms and dragged him toward the freezer. He was heavier than I expected, but fear gave me extra strength. I got both of us inside the freezer and locked the door. It was freezing cold, probably 10 degrees below zero, but at least we were safe. I pulled out my cell phone and called my manager, Dave. It was almost 3 in the morning, but this was an emergency. "Tyler? What the hell are you calling me for at this hour?" Dave sounded angry and sleepy. "Dave, you need to call the police right now. There are people in the store, but they're not normal people. They attacked Jim and—" "Slow down, Tyler. Are you saying someone broke in?" "Yes, but it's not a normal break-in. These people are acting like animals. They're biting through cans and walking on their hands and—" "Tyler, you sound like you're having some kind of breakdown. Are you on drugs? Have you been drinking?" "No, I'm serious. There are at least 15 of them, and they're not human anymore." Dave was quiet for a moment. "Okay, I'm going to call the police and have them check on you. Just stay where you are and don't do anything stupid." He hung up, and I was alone in the freezer with unconscious Jim. Through the metal door, I could hear the creatures moving around the back area of the store. But they weren't just randomly destroying things. They were being systematic, going through every aisle in order. I could hear one of them trying to operate the cash register at the customer service counter. Beep, 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 the sounds of someone pressing buttons in sequence, like they were trying to figure out how it worked. After about 2 hours, everything went quiet. Completely quiet. I waited another hour before I felt safe enough to open the freezer door. Jim was starting to wake up, mumbling and confused, but he seemed okay, except for the scratch marks. The store was empty when we came out, but I found evidence of their intelligence everywhere. In the canned goods aisle, they had sorted all the products by type and arranged the cans in perfect geometric patterns: circles, triangles, and squares. It was like some kind of mathematical art project. But the most disturbing thing was in the frozen foods section. Someone had used blood, I don't know if it was human or animal blood, to draw complex equations on the white freezer doors. These weren't simple math problems. They were advanced chemistry and biology formulas that looked like college-level work. I took photos of everything with my phone before the police arrived, because I knew no one would believe me otherwise. When the officers got there 20 minutes later, they found Jim with no memory of what had happened. He just remembered making his rounds and then waking up in the freezer with me. The store security cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned during the exact time of the incident. All 12 cameras showed nothing but static from 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. The digital recording system said there was a system error during those hours. When Dave came in later that morning and saw my photos, he fired me on the spot. He said I was creating a disturbance and filing false reports. He claimed I had arranged everything myself as some kind of prank and that I was trying to make the store look bad. Corporate backed him up, and I was banned from all Safeway properties. But I couldn't let it go. I started researching missing persons reports in the Wasilla area and found something disturbing. Over the past 6 months, 12 homeless people had disappeared. All of them were last seen near the woods behind our store, where illegal camping areas had been set up. People without homes sometimes camped back there during the summer, even though it was against city rules. The missing people were all different ages and backgrounds, but they had one thing in common. They'd all been living rough for months or years. Exposure to harsh weather, poor nutrition, maybe drug or alcohol problems, people that society had forgotten about. I think something in those woods is changing people. Something that takes humans and evolves them into something between human and animal. Maybe it's a disease, maybe it's something supernatural, or maybe it's some kind of government experiment gone wrong. I don't know what it is, but I know what I saw. Sometimes I drive by the store late at night, and I can see those same upright figures watching from the tree line. They're still there, still learning. And I swear they're getting smarter each time I see them, like they're slowly remembering how to be human again. I never got another job in retail. I finished my degree in computer science and work from home now. But I still have nightmares about those reflecting eyes and the sound of claws scratching on metal doors. And sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I catch myself sniffing the air like an animal, and I worry that whatever changed those people might be contagious. If you work night shifts anywhere near wooded areas, especially in Alaska, pay attention to the wildlife patterns. If the normal animals suddenly disappear, if you find evidence of intelligence where there should only be instinct, get out. Don't try to be a hero, don't try to document it, just leave. Because some evolutions can't be reversed, and some hungers can never be satisfied. My name is Carlos Mendez, and I've been delivering pizza for Tony's Pizza in Fairbanks for 3 years now. I started the job during my sophomore year at University of Alaska Fairbanks to help pay for textbooks and rent. What began as just weekend work turned into my main source of income when I realized I could make decent money working the late shift from 6 p.m. to 3 a.m. College kids and night shift workers tip better than most people think, especially when you're bringing them hot food at midnight in sub-zero temperatures. I knew every street in Fairbanks like the back of my hand. Every apartment complex, every dorm building, every late-night business that stayed open past 10 p.m. I had the whole delivery game down to a science. My Honda Civic wasn't much to look at, but it had good snow tires and a reliable heater. I kept insulated delivery bags in the trunk and always carried emergency supplies, or jumper cables, emergency flares, and extra blankets. In Alaska, being prepared isn't just smart, it's survival. Tony, my manager, was a good guy who'd been running the pizza place for 15 years. He knew I was reliable and never complained about taking the weird late-night deliveries that other drivers avoided. The pay was decent, but the real money came from tips. On a good Friday or Saturday night, I could pull in $200 in tips alone. That kind of money meant the difference between eating ramen noodles all week or actually having groceries in my fridge. But what happened on January 20th, 2024, changed everything I thought I knew about my job, my city, and what's really out there in the darkness beyond Fairbanks. January 20th was the coldest night of the year. The temperature had dropped to negative 50 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough that your breath turns to ice crystals before it hits the ground. Most smart people stayed inside, but that's exactly when pizza delivery gets busy. People don't want to leave their warm houses, so they order food instead. That night was different in other ways too. The aurora borealis was incredibly active, painting the sky in sheets of green and blue light that danced across the horizon. I'd seen the northern lights hundreds of times, but that night they seemed brighter and more intense than usual. The Weather Service had issued warnings about the extreme cold, and even the university had canceled evening classes. Around 11 p.m., just as things were starting to slow down, Tony called me over to the counter. He had a delivery order that made me raise my eyebrows. 5 large pizzas going to something called Research Station 7 way out on the Stees Highway. The address was about 40 miles north of town, farther than I'd ever delivered before. That's a long way out, I told Tony, looking at the receipt. Are you sure this is legit? Tony nodded and showed me the payment confirmation on his computer screen. They paid in full online, plus a $50 tip. Cash is cash, Carlos. Just be careful on those roads. The tip was too good to pass up. $50 would cover my groceries for the next 2 weeks. I loaded the 5 large pizzas into my insulated bags, checked my gas tank, and headed out into the brutal cold. My car protested starting in the extreme temperature, but after a few tries, the engine turned over and began its slow warm-up process. The drive north on the Stees Highway was eerily quiet. No other cars were on the road, which wasn't surprising given the weather. My headlights cut through the darkness while the aurora continued its strange dance overhead. The GPS on my phone guided me further and further from town, past familiar landmarks and into territory I'd never explored before. After about 35 minutes of driving, my GPS announced that I was approaching my destination, but as I slowed down and looked around, I couldn't see any buildings anywhere. Just endless snow-covered wilderness stretching in every direction. I was about to call Tony when I spotted lights ahead through the trees. Following a narrow access road I hadn't noticed before, I found myself approaching a small, unmarked building that definitely hadn't been there before. I'd driven this highway many times for long-distance deliveries to remote mining camps, and I was certain there had never been any structures in this area. The building was maybe the size of a large trailer, with no signs or identifying marks. Generator units hummed loudly outside, and bright white lights blazed from every window. I parked near the entrance and grabbed the pizza bags from my trunk. The cold hit me like a physical blow, and I hurried toward the building's front door. Before I could knock, the door opened, and a woman in a white lab coat peered out at me with obvious surprise. "Can I help you?" she asked, looking confused. Pizza delivery for Research Station 7, I replied, showing her the receipt. 5 large pizzas, already paid for. The woman frowned and looked at the paperwork. We didn't order any pizza, she said slowly. This is the address on the order, I insisted, showing her my phone's GPS. Research Station 7, this location on the Stees Highway. Behind her, I could see into the building's interior. It was filled with electronic equipment and computer screens displaying data I didn't recognize. Multiple monitors showed streams of numbers, mathematical formulas, and what looked like star charts or constellation maps. The equations on the screens were incredibly complex, filled with symbols I'd never seen before. Just looking at them directly made my eyes water and gave me a mild headache. The woman examined my receipt again, then sighed. Well, I suppose we can pay for them. My colleagues have been working all night. She disappeared inside for a moment, then returned with cash for the pizza cost, plus my $50 tip. What kind of research do you do out here? I asked as she handed me the money. Government work, she replied quickly. Agricultural research. Soil samples and climate data. But that explanation didn't make sense. The equipment I'd glimpsed inside looked nothing like agricultural research gear. Those computer screens were displaying astronomical data and mathematical formulas that seemed far too advanced for soil analysis. Plus, what kind of agricultural research happened in the middle of winter in frozen ground? As I walked back to my car, I noticed the aurora above us was behaving strangely. Instead of the normal flowing curtains of green light, the aurora was forming perfect geometric patterns, triangles, hexagons, and complex mathematical shapes that moved with precise, calculated movements. The patterns were too exact and organized to be natural aurora activity. I'd grown up seeing the northern lights, and they never behaved like this. I pulled out my phone to take pictures, thinking my astronomy professor might be interested in seeing this unusual aurora display. But when I looked at the photos on my phone's screen, they showed only normal aurora patterns. The geometric shapes I was seeing with my naked eyes weren't showing up in the camera at all. The drive back to town started normally enough, but within 10 minutes, things began going wrong. My radio, which had been playing classic rock from a Fairbanks station, suddenly switched to something else entirely. Instead of music, I was hearing streams of numbers being spoken in different languages: English, Russian, Chinese, and others I couldn't identify. 47.6639 north, a calm voice said in English. 147.8472 west. Distance, 4.3 to 7 light years. Then a Russian voice. Coordinates confirmed. Signal strength optimal. Preparing transmission sequence. Chinese voices followed with more numbers, coordinates, and technical terms I didn't understand. The strangest part was that some of the number sequences seemed familiar, like I should know what they meant even though I'd never heard them before. I tried changing the radio station, but every frequency picked up the same thing: streams of coordinates and technical data in multiple languages. When I tried turning the radio off completely, the voices continued anyway. Somehow, my car's radio was receiving signals that weren't coming from any local broadcasting stations. Then my GPS started malfunctioning. According to the display, I was driving 200 feet underground, traveling at impossible speeds that kept changing randomly. My speedometer showed I was going 90 miles per hour when I knew I was driving carefully at 45. The fuel gauge claimed my tank was simultaneously empty and completely full. Even my dashboard clock was spinning randomly, showing different times every few seconds. All of my car's instruments were providing impossible readings that defied basic physics. The temperature gauge showed my engine was both overheating and freezing at the same time. My odometer was counting backward and forward simultaneously. Nothing electronic in my car was working properly. The most disturbing part was losing track of time. When I finally reached the outskirts of Fairbanks, my phone showed 3 a.m., but that was impossible. The round trip should have taken no more than 2 hours, including the time spent at the research station. Somehow, I had lost 3 hours without any memory of where that time had gone. I made it back to Tony's Pizza just as he was closing up for the night. When I told him about the weird radio signals and GPS problems, he suggested that the extreme cold might have affected my car's electrical systems. That explanation made sense for normal electronic malfunctions, but it didn't explain the coordinated voices speaking in multiple languages or the aurora forming geometric patterns. The next day, I decided to drive back to research Station 7 during daylight hours. I wanted to ask more questions about their work and maybe get a better look at their equipment. But when I reached the location where I'd made the delivery, there was nothing there. No building, no access road, no tire tracks in the snow, no evidence that any structure had ever existed at that spot. I checked my GPS coordinates multiple times, cross-referenced them with my delivery receipt, and even used a different navigation app to confirm the location. I was definitely in the right place, but Research Station 7 had completely vanished. Back in town, I asked other delivery drivers if they'd ever been to that address. None of them had ever heard of Research Station 7, and several drivers who'd been working for years said they'd never made deliveries anywhere near that location on the Stees Highway. I researched the coordinates online and discovered something impossible. According to United States Geological Survey data, that location was solid permafrost extending hundreds of feet underground. The ground had been frozen for thousands of years, making it impossible to excavate foundations or install utilities for any kind of permanent structure. But I had definitely been there. I had the $50 tip in my wallet and clear memories of the building, the equipment, and the woman in the lab coat. The delivery had happened, even if I couldn't prove it or find the location again. That's when the dreams started. Every night, I dreamed about the mathematical formulas I'd seen on the computer screens at Research Station 7. In the dreams, I somehow understood what all those complex equations meant. They weren't just random numbers. They were coordinates pointing to specific star systems, exact locations of planets orbiting distant stars. Not just general directions, but precise navigation instructions for reaching worlds that were light years away from Earth. The formulas included calculations for interstellar travel, gravitational field navigation, and communication protocols for contacting civilizations on other planets. I would wake up knowing things I'd never studied. I knew the exact distance to Proxima Centauri, the atmospheric composition of planets I'd never heard of, and complex theories about faster-than-light communication. This information was just there in my head, like memories of things I'd learned years ago. My astronomy professor, Dr. Sarah Chen, was amazed when I started asking detailed questions about stellar navigation and answering complex problems about interstellar distances that we hadn't covered in class. When she asked where I'd learned this information, I couldn't give her a satisfactory answer. I just knew it somehow. I started researching the history of that area along the Stees Highway. In newspaper archives and local historical records, I found scattered reports of strange lights dating back to the 1800s. Native elders from local tribes had stories about star knowledge that supposedly came from beneath the frozen ground in that region. According to these traditional stories, ancient objects had fallen from the sky long before humans came to Alaska. These objects had buried themselves deep under the ice and had been sleeping there for thousands of years. But they weren't completely dormant. They were slowly sending signals back to their home among the stars, calling for something to return to Earth. The more I researched, the more convinced I became that Research Station 7 was real, but it existed in a different layer of reality than our normal world. Sometimes, when atmospheric conditions were just right, like during extreme aurora activity, it would phase into our reality for brief periods. The people working there weren't conducting agricultural research for the US government. They were from somewhere else entirely, using advanced technology to facilitate communication between Earth and distant star systems. They were helping to guide something vast and ancient back to our planet. I quit my job at Tony's Pizza and changed my major from business to astrophysics. I couldn't explain why, but I felt driven to understand stellar navigation, interstellar communication, and the mathematics of space travel. The knowledge I'd gained from that one delivery was pushing me toward a completely different career path. Every January 20th since 2024, I drive back to those exact coordinates on the Stees Highway and wait. I bring camping gear, extra food, and scientific equipment I've learned to use. I wait for the aurora to form those perfect geometric patterns again, for Research Station 7 to phase back into our reality. Because I need to understand what they're really doing out there and why they're contacting their distant home. I have a terrible feeling that something vast and ancient has been waiting among the stars for thousands of years, and they're helping to guide it back to Earth. And when it arrives, our world will never be the same again. My name is Marcus Thompson, and I drove for Uber in Anchorage, Alaska for 3 years while studying business at UAA. I thought I'd seen everything during those late-night shifts. Drunk college kids throwing up in my back seat, people getting into fights, even someone trying to pay me with a bag of frozen fish. But what happened on February 2nd, 2024, made me quit driving forever and move back to California. Some passengers aren't human at all. Driving Uber in Anchorage during winter was tough work, but the money was good. Most nights, I'd start around 9 p.m. and drive until 3 a.m., making about $200 on a busy weekend. My 2018 Honda Civic had all-weather tires, seat covers to protect from spills, and a dash cam that recorded everything. I kept emergency supplies in my trunk: jumper cables, blankets, water, and protein bars. In Alaska, you never know when you might get stuck. February 2nd was one of those brutal winter nights where the temperature hit -35 degrees Fahrenheit. The kind of cold that makes your car engine struggle to turn over and your breath freeze the moment you step outside. Most Uber drivers had logged off by midnight, but I needed the money for next semester's tuition. The bars were still busy downtown, and surge pricing was at 2.5x normal rates. I'd just dropped off a group of college students at their dorm when my phone pinged with a pickup request. The address was in Mountain View, a rough neighborhood known for drug problems and police calls. The pickup location showed an apartment complex called Northway Gardens, GARD, a rundown place where most of the units had broken windows and the parking lot was full of potholes. My Uber rating was 4.9 stars after 3 years, and I'd completed over 5,000 rides. I knew which neighborhoods to avoid after certain hours, but Mountain View wasn't the worst. I'd picked up plenty of people there before. The ride request showed a destination about 45 minutes outside the city, up in the Chugach Mountains. It would be a good, two fare. Probably $80 with surge pricing. I pulled into the Northway Gardens parking lot at 12:47 a.m. Half the streetlights were broken, and the few that worked cast these weird orange shadows on the dirty snow. I texted the passenger that I'd arrived and waited in my car with the engine running. The heater was blasting, but I could still feel the cold trying to get in through every crack. After about 3 minutes, a tall, thin man walked out of one of the buildings. He was wearing a dirty brown winter coat that looked too big for him, and a knit hat pulled down low over his face. When he got closer to my car, I noticed he was really tall. Maybe 6'5" or 6'6". He opened the back door and slid into the seat behind me. "Thanks for picking me up," he said, and his voice sounded strange, like it was coming from 2 different people talking at the same time. "The address is 15847 Eagle River Road, up in the mountains." I typed the address into my GPS and started driving. That's when I first noticed the smell. It was horrible, like rotten meat mixed with wet dog and something sour, like milk that had gone bad weeks ago. I cracked my window a little bit, thinking maybe it was just his coat that needed washing. Some people don't have easy access to laundromats. The guy didn't talk much as we drove through downtown Anchorage and onto the Glen Highway. Every time I looked in my rearview mirror, he was staring out the window and occasionally sniffing the air really loudly, like he was trying to smell something specific. His breathing sounded weird too, not quite right somehow. About 20 minutes into the drive, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. I could feel warm breath on the back of my neck, like he was leaning forward and breathing on me. When I adjusted my rearview mirror to get a better look, I saw his reflection, and something was definitely wrong. His face looked too long, like someone had stretched it out. And his mouth, I swear his mouth looked wider than any human mouth should be. When he noticed me looking, he smiled, but it wasn't a normal smile. It was too big and showed too many teeth. "Is everything okay back there?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "You comfortable with the temperature?" He didn't answer with words. Instead, he made this clicking sound with his teeth. Not random clicking, but rhythmic and deliberate. Click, click, click. Click, click, click. Like he was speaking in some kind of code. I tried to make conversation to calm my nerves. "So, you heading home? Pretty cold night to be out." More clicking sounds. Then he said, "I'm very hungry," in that weird double voice. We turned off the main highway onto Eagle River Road, and that's when things got really bad. The road was dark with no streetlights, just my headlights cutting through the darkness. I looked in the mirror again and realized my passenger wasn't wearing his winter coat anymore. Somehow, he'd taken it off without me noticing. What I saw in the reflection made me almost swerve off the road. His skin was pale gray, stretched tight over visible ribs. His arms looked way too long for his body, and his fingers ended in black, curved nails that looked more like claws. This wasn't human. I pulled over to the side of the road, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. "Sir, I think there might be a mistake with the address. Let me double-check my GPS." When he looked up at me in the mirror, I saw his eyes were completely yellow with no pupils. Just solid yellow, like a cat's eyes but bigger and brighter. He smiled again, and I counted at least 3 rows of sharp, pointed teeth. "Keep driving," he said in that horrible double voice. "We're almost there." I was terrified, but I was also afraid of what would happen if I refused. This thing could probably kill me before I could even get out of the car. So I put the car back in drive and continued toward the mountain address, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode. In the rearview mirror, I watched him licking his lips with a tongue that was way too long. He kept staring at the back of my neck like he was planning something. Then he started making this low humming sound that made every hair on my body stand up. The humming got louder and turned into what sounded like words, but in a language I'd never heard before. It sounded ancient and wrong, like sounds that human vocal cords weren't meant to make. Then something even weirder happened. My car radio started picking up the same sounds, like he was somehow broadcasting them through the airwaves. The static on the radio mixed with his voice until it filled the entire car. I reached to turn off the radio, but the volume knob wouldn't work, neither would the power button. The sounds just kept getting louder and more horrible. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 15 more minutes, we reached the address. It was a dark wooden cabin set back from the road, surrounded by tall pine trees. There were no lights on anywhere, no signs of life, and no other cars in the driveway. The place looked abandoned. "This is perfect," the creature said, and I heard bones cracking as he moved in the back seat. I made the mistake of turning around to look at him directly. He was contorting his body in ways that should have been impossible. His neck twisted 180 degrees so his head faced backward while his body still faced forward. The sound of bones breaking and reforming filled the car. He opened the door and stepped out, but his legs bent in the wrong direction, like a bird's legs but on a human body. As he stood up outside my car window, he kept growing taller until he was at least 8 feet tall. His arms hung down past his knees, and those black claws scraped against the side of my car. "Thank you for the ride, Marcus," he said, and I realized I'd never told him my name. "I've been so very hungry. I've been..." Floored the gas pedal and got out of there as fast as my Honda could manage on that icy mountain road. I didn't look back, didn't slow down, and didn't stop driving until I reached the bright lights of downtown Anchorage. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the steering wheel. When I finally felt safe enough to check my phone, I opened the Uber app to look at the ride details. There was no record of the trip, no pickup request, no ride completion, no payment. According to the app, I hadn't given anyone a ride that night. I drove to the nearest 24-hour McDonald's and sat in the parking lot for an hour, trying to process what had happened. I looked up the pickup address on my phone, Northway Gardens. According to city records, that building had been demolished 6 months ago. But I'd been there. I'd seen it with my own eyes. The next morning, I couldn't stop thinking about the mountain cabin address. I looked it up online and found some disturbing information in old police reports. Over the past 2 years, 3 hikers had gone missing in that exact area. All of them were experienced outdoors, people who knew the mountains well. Their bodies were found weeks later, but what the police found wasn't normal. The bodies were completely stripped of flesh and muscle, leaving only bones and scraps of clothing. Forensic experts said the bite marks on the bones didn't match any known animal in Alaska, not bears, not wolves, nothing in their database. I started having nightmares about those yellow eyes and that double voice. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on my classes, and definitely couldn't drive for Uber anymore. The smell of that creature, rotten meat and wet dog, seemed to follow me everywhere. I finally worked up the courage to talk to some native elders at the Alaska Native Heritage Center. When I described what I'd encountered, their faces went pale. An elderly Inupiaq woman named Sarah told me I'd met a Wendigo, a cannibalistic creature from their traditional stories. Long ago, she explained, Humans could become Wendigos if they resorted to eating human flesh during times of starvation. The transformation makes them impossibly tall and thin, with an endless hunger for human meat. They can never be satisfied, no matter how much they consume. She said Wendigos were cunning hunters who could mimic human appearance long enough to lure victims to isolated places. They were strongest in winter and could influence technology and radio signals. Everything she described matched what I'd experienced perfectly. I quit driving for Uber that week and moved back to my hometown in California before the semester ended. I told my parents I was homesick, but the truth was I couldn't stay in Alaska knowing that thing was out there, hunting people in the darkness. I finished my degree online and got a job at a bank in Sacramento. Normal hours, bright office lighting, plenty of people around at all times. I thought I was safe, thought I'd left that nightmare behind in the Alaskan wilderness. But sometimes, when I'm driving alone at night, I catch a whiff of that smell. Rotten meat and wet dog. I hear rhythmic clicking sounds coming from my empty back seat, and my car radio picks up strange signals that sound like words in that ancient, wrong language. I know the Wendigo is still out there, still hungry, still hunting. And sometimes I wonder if giving it a ride that night created some kind of connection between us. Maybe it knows where I am now. Maybe it's just waiting for the right moment to finish what it started. If you're ever driving late at night and get a pickup request from someone you can't quite see clearly, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, if the passenger smells like death, if they make sounds that don't seem human, don't pick them up. Some rides aren't worth the money, no matter how much you need it. The Wendigo is patient. It's been hunting for centuries, and it knows humans are creatures of habit. It knows we'll always need money, always want to help, always convince ourselves that everything has a logical explanation. But sometimes, there is no logical explanation. Sometimes, the monster is real. My name is Robert Martinez, and I've been working construction for 15 years. I started right out of high school, learning the trade from my uncle who worked oil rigs in Texas. I've built everything from shopping malls to office buildings, worked through hurricanes in Louisiana and heat waves in Arizona. I've seen accidents that would make most people quit, watched good men fall from scaffolding and get crushed by heavy equipment. But the money kept me coming back, especially when I got hired by Arctic Pipeline Services. They paid triple what I made down south, and all I had to do was spend 6 months a year in northern Alaska building pipeline sections. What happened in February 2024 near Teshekpuk Lake changed everything I thought I knew about what was really dangerous up there. The job seemed simple enough when our crew arrived in January. We were extending a new section of the Trans-Alaska Pipeline about 40 miles northeast of the main line. The area was completely empty. Just frozen tundra stretching for miles in every direction. Our temporary housing was basically a collection of modified shipping containers connected by covered walkways. Each container had 4 bunks, a small heater, and not much else. The company flew in supplies every 2 weeks on weather permitting. We had satellite internet that worked maybe half the time, and our only connection to the outside world was a radio system that reached the main pipeline station 60 miles south. The work was brutal but straightforward. 12-hour shifts and temperatures that regularly hit 40 below zero. We'd dig trenches through permanently frozen ground using specialized equipment designed for Arctic conditions. The pipeline sections were prefabricated steel, each one weighing about 3 tons. We used massive tracked excavators and specialized welding equipment that could function in extreme cold. Every piece of our gear was rated for temperatures down to -50 degrees. Safety was everything up there. Frostbite could happen in minutes if you weren't careful. We had strict protocols about working in pairs, checking on each other every hour, and never going outside the housing units without full winter gear. That gear included insulated coveralls, vapor barrier boots, Arctic gloves, and face protection. Without it, you'd be dead from exposure in under an hour. Our crew was 8 men total. Most of us had worked together on previous jobs, and we knew we could count on each other. The crew chief was Jim Morrison, a 20-year veteran who ran a tight operation. Our heavy equipment operator was Dave Kowalski, and he was the most reliable guy any of us had ever worked with. Dave had been running excavators and bulldozers for Arctic Pipeline for 3 years straight. He never missed a shift, never complained about the cold, and could operate equipment in conditions that would shut down most operators. February 20th started like any other day. The temperature was holding steady at -42 degrees with clear skies. Perfect working conditions by Alaska standards. Jim had us scheduled to finish connecting the last section of pipe to the main junction, which would complete our part of the project. We were actually ahead of schedule, which meant we might get to go home 2 weeks early. But when we gathered for the morning safety meeting at 6 a.m., Dave wasn't there. Jim checked the bunk assignments, thinking maybe Dave had overslept. But when we went to Dave's container, his bunk hadn't been slept in. All his personal gear was still there, his extra clothes, his books, even his wallet and phone. But his winter work gear was hanging in the closet where he'd left it the night before. That sent up immediate red flags for all of us. Nobody, and I mean nobody, goes outside in that weather without full protection. Jim tried reaching Dave on the radio, but got nothing. We expanded our search to all the housing containers, the equipment storage areas, even the generator building. No sign of Dave anywhere. Jim made the call to organize a search party. He, myself, and 2 other guys named Mike and Tony would follow any tracks we could find while the rest of the crew stayed behind to monitor communications. We suited up in full Arctic gear and headed out with handheld GPS units and emergency radios. It didn't take long to find tracks leading away from the housing area. Dave's boots left a clear trail in the snow, and the tracks were definitely his goal. We all knew the distinctive tread pattern of his work boots. But something was weird about the spacing. The steps were too far apart, like Dave had been running. That didn't make sense, because running in that cold would be suicide. You'd overheat, start sweating, and freeze to death when you stopped. About half a mile from the housing, we found pieces of Dave's shirt scattered in the snow. The fabric was torn to shreds, like it had been caught in heavy machinery or ripped apart by something with claws. But there weren't any machinery tracks in the area, and the tears looked too random to be mechanical damage. The trail continued toward Teshekpuk Lake, which was about 2 miles from our work site. We'd all seen the lake from a distance, but never had any reason to go there. It was just another frozen body of water in an area full of them. As we followed Dave's tracks, we started noticing other marks in the snow. Long drag marks, like something huge had been pulled across the ground. The drag marks were parallel to Dave's footprints, but much wider, maybe 8 or 10 feet across. When we reached the lake shore, we found something that stopped us all in our tracks. There was a hole in the ice about 10 feet wide, with jagged edges like something had broken through from underneath. The ice around Teshekpuk Lake was supposed to be at least 4 feet thick in February. Breaking through that much ice would take tremendous force, like a submarine surfacing or controlled explosives. But the weird part was that chunks of ice were scattered around the hole, some of them weighing hundreds of pounds. They were thrown 20 or 30 feet from the hole itself. Whatever broke through hadn't just pushed up, it had exploded upward with enough force to launch massive ice chunks like they were snowballs. At the edge of the hole, we found Dave's boots. They were sitting side by side, perfectly placed like he'd carefully taken them off before going swimming. In 40 below weather, in a lake that should have been frozen solid. We called for search and rescue immediately, but they told us the lake was too dangerous for diving operations. The water was too cold, too deep, and with no way to predict ice stability, they couldn't risk sending divers down. They said they'd come out with ground-penetrating radar equipment when weather permitted, but that could be days or even weeks. That night, none of us slept well. Around midnight, we started hearing sounds coming from the direction of the lake. Low, rumbling calls that seemed to come from deep underwater. The sounds were rhythmic, almost like singing, but not like any animal any of us had ever heard. Mike said it reminded him of whale songs, but we were hundreds of miles from the ocean. Around 3 a.m, something started hitting the underside of the ice out on the lake. The impacts were so powerful they shook our housing containers 2 miles away. We could hear the ice cracking and groaning under whatever was hitting it. The sounds went on for about an hour, then stopped completely. In the morning, Jim decided we needed to check the lake again before calling for evacuation. When we got there, the hole had tripled in size. The ice around the edges was gouged with claw marks that were at least 6 inches deep and a foot long. Whatever made those marks was massive and had serious cutting power. Jim got on the satellite phone to corporate headquarters, and told them we were shutting down operations immediately. He described the situation as a safety emergency and requested immediate evacuation for the entire crew. Corporate wasn't happy about the schedule disruption, but they agreed to send a helicopter the next day. We were loading equipment into storage containers when Mike spotted someone walking across the tundra toward our housing. At first, we thought it was a rescue worker or maybe someone from another pipeline crew, but as the figure got closer, we realized it was Dave. Dave was walking completely naked in 40 below weather. His skin should have been black with frostbite, and he should have been dead from exposure within minutes. But he showed no signs of hypothermia at all. His skin had a grayish tint, and he moved stiffly, like he was learning how to walk for the first time. We called out to him, but Dave didn't respond to our voices. When he turned toward us, we could see his eyes had turned completely white. Not clouded over like cataracts, but pure white like someone had painted them. He wasn't blinking at all, and his face showed no expression. "Dave, what happened to you?" I shouted. "Where have you been?" Dave opened his mouth like he was going to answer, but instead of words, dark water poured out. Not just a little water, but a steady stream, like someone had turned on a faucet inside his throat. Water kept flowing from his mouth, then started coming from his nose and ears too. We backed away as more and more water kept pouring out of Dave's body. The water was dark, almost black, and it smelled like rotting fish and pond scum. When the water hit the snow around Dave's feet, it started freezing instantly, forming a growing circle of ice. Dave collapsed forward into the snow, but the water kept flowing out of him. Within minutes, he was completely encased in a block of ice, with his eyes still wide open, staring at nothing. The ice was perfectly clear, and we could see Dave's face frozen inside it like some kind of horrible statue. Jim called for emergency evacuation, and we left Dave's frozen body for the authorities to deal with. The helicopter arrived 6 hours later and flew us straight to Fairbanks. Corporate put us up in a hotel while they figured out what to tell Dave's family and how to handle the situation officially. I did some research while we waited. Teshekpuk Lake was considered sacred by the local Inupiat people. They had legends about something called Tizaruk, a massive serpentine creature that lived in the deepest lakes and controlled water and ice. According to their stories, Tizaruk would possess people who disturbed its territory, transforming them into water spirits that served the creature. The possessed victims would appear to drown, but their bodies would become vessels for lake water controlled by Tizaruk. They could walk around on land, but they weren't really alive anymore. They were just water held in human shape by the creature's power. Pipeline construction in that area was permanently suspended after our incident. Corporate called it an environmental protection measure, but I know the real reason. Nobody wanted to send more crews to a place where workers could disappear into a frozen lake and come back as something else. I still check satellite images of Teshekpuk Lake sometimes. The hole in the ice never refroze, even when temperatures dropped to 50 below. And sometimes, if you look carefully at the high-resolution images, you can see something massive moving in the dark water below. I transferred to a different division after that and now work on pipeline maintenance in Texas. The heat doesn't bother me anymore. After what happened in Alaska, I'm grateful for any job that keeps me away from deep, dark water. Sometimes I wake up at night thinking I can hear that rhythmic calling sound coming from the lake, even though I'm 1,500 miles away. Dave's family was told he died in an industrial accident. They never found his body, officially. But I know where he is. He's still out there in Teshekpuk Lake, serving something that should have been left alone. And corporate knows it too, which is why they'll never send another crew to that area again. The Inupiat people were right about Tizharuk. Some places are sacred for a reason, and some jobs just aren't worth the money. My name is Kevin Nakamura, and I've been a commercial fisherman for 12 years. I started working the boats when I was 18, right out of high school in Nome, Alaska. My dad was a fisherman, and his dad before him. It's dangerous work, but it's good money if you know what you're doing and don't mind the cold. I've worked everything from summer salmon runs to winter crab fishing. I've been through storms that would scare most people to death. I've had engines fail 50 miles from shore in 30-foot swells. I've pulled guys out of the water when they fell through thin ice. In 12 years, I thought I'd seen everything the ocean could throw at me. But what happened on February 28th, 2024 changed everything I thought I knew about what lives under the ice. I still work as a fisherman, but I don't go ice fishing anymore. And after you hear this story, you'll understand why. Winter fishing in Alaska is different from what most people think. We don't just sit around waiting for spring. Some of the best fishing happens when the sea ice forms thick enough to support equipment. Arctic char, cod, even some salmon runs continue under the ice all winter long. February is usually our last month for ice fishing. By March, the ice starts getting unstable. You have to know what you're doing. Ice that looks solid can have weak spots that'll drop you into water so cold you've got maybe 2 minutes before hypothermia kicks in. I was working with my partner Jake Morrison that day. Jake's been fishing these waters longer than I have. He taught me most of what I know about reading ice conditions. If Jake said the ice was safe, it was safe. We'd been partners for 4 years, and we'd never had a serious accident. February 28th was supposed to be our last trip of the season. The weather forecast was good, clear skies, light winds, temperature holding steady at -15. Perfect conditions for one last good day on the ice. We loaded up our snowmobiles, with gear at 4 in the morning. Ice augers, fishing rods, tackle boxes, emergency kit, GPS unit, radio, and enough supplies for a full day. We always carried more gear than we needed. In Alaska, being prepared isn't just smart, it's what keeps you alive. The spot we picked was about 15 miles offshore. It's a good fishing area where the current keeps the fish active, even in winter. The ice was 3 feet thick, plenty safe for walking around and setting up equipment. We'd fished this exact location dozens of times before. We used gas-powered augers to cut 6 holes in the ice, each about 8 inches across. You space them out maybe 20 feet apart to cover more area. The holes go straight down through the ice into the dark water below. When you're ice fishing, those holes are your only connection to the world underneath. We started fishing around 7 in the morning, just as the sun was coming up. The fishing was good right from the start. Arctic char were biting, and we had several nice cod in the first hour. Jake was in a good mood, talking about how we'd have enough fish to make the trip worth it. Around 10 o'clock, I noticed something while I was reeling in a line. There was a shadow under the ice, maybe 30 feet down. At first, I thought it was just a school of fish, but this shadow was big, much bigger than any fish I'd ever seen in these waters. "Jake," I called over. "Take a look at this." He came over and looked down through the ice. The shadow was moving in slow circles underneath us. It was dark, maybe 12 feet long, and it moved wrong. Fish don't swim like that. Neither do seals. "Probably a seal that got trapped when the ice formed," Jake said. "Happens sometimes. Poor thing's probably looking for a breathing hole." That made sense. Seals can get trapped under ice if they don't find air holes in time. But something about the way this thing moved bothered me. It wasn't panicked like a trapped animal would be. It was just watching. By 11 o'clock, we'd pulled in 8 good-sized fish, but that shadow was still there, still moving in those slow circles. Jake tried tapping on the ice with his fishing rod to scare it away from our lines. The shadow stopped moving. Then, it started moving directly toward the sound. "That's weird," Jake said. "Usually that scares them off." I looked down through the clear ice. The shadow was getting bigger as it came closer to the surface. And as it got closer, I could see it wasn't shaped like any seal I'd ever seen. It was shaped like a person. "Jake, we need to get away from this hole," I said. But Jake was leaning over the fishing hole, trying to get a better look. "I want to see what this thing is," he said. "Maybe it's some kind of whale calf or something." That's when something grabbed his fishing line from underneath and yanked hard. Jake was pulled forward so fast I barely had time to react. He was going headfirst into that 8-inch hole in the ice. I grabbed the back of his jacket and pulled him backward just as his head was about to go under. His fishing rod was gone, just vanished into the water. "What the hell?" Jake said, breathing hard. "Something grabbed my line, something strong." We both looked down into the hole. The water was dark, but we could see something pale moving just under the surface. Jake pulled out his flashlight and shined it down into the water. That's when we saw the face. It was looking right back at us, human-shaped, but wrong in every way that mattered. The skin was pale green, like old copper. The eyes were huge and completely black, no white parts at all. There was no nose, just two slits above a mouth that was way too wide. And the teeth, rows and rows of needle-sharp teeth like an anglerfish. Long, stringy hair floated around its head like seaweed. Its hands had webbed fingers with claws instead of fingernails. It reached up toward Jake, through the hole, trying to grab his leg. We both scrambled backward from the hole. "Did you see that?" Jake whispered. "Did you see that thing?" Before I could answer, we heard splashing from our other fishing holes. I looked over and saw more of these things coming up through every hole we'd cut in the ice. Pale faces looking up at us from the dark water. 6 of them, all with the same wrong features. All staring at us with those huge black eyes. The things started climbing out of the holes. When they stood up on the ice, they were over 7 feet tall with arms and legs that were too long for their bodies. Their skin was covered in scales, and water dripped off them constantly, freezing into ice crystals on the surface. One of them opened its mouth and spoke. Its voice sounded like water going down a drain. "Come swim with us." They moved toward us with jerky, unnatural movements, like they weren't used to walking on land. But they were fast, much faster than they should have been. Jake and I ran for our snowmobiles. Behind us, I could hear the things clicking and chirping to each other in some kind of language. When I looked back, they had dropped down and were sliding across the ice on their bellies like seals, using their clawed hands to pull themselves forward. They were gaining on us. We reached our snowmobiles and got them started. The engines turned over on the first try, thank God for that. We took off toward shore, going as fast as we dared on the rough ice. When I looked back, the creatures had stopped chasing us. They were diving back into the holes in the ice, disappearing into the dark water below. We called the Coast Guard as soon as we got back to shore. The duty officer listened to our story and said he'd make a report, but I could tell he didn't believe us. He probably thought we'd been drinking or had hypothermia or something. "Look," he said, "we get a lot of strange reports from guys who've been out on the ice too long. The mind plays tricks when you're cold and tired." But Jake and I knew what we'd seen. We decided to go back the next day with a marine biologist named Dr. Sarah Chen. She worked for the University of Alaska and studied Arctic marine life. If anyone could identify these things, it would be her. When we got back to the fishing spot, all of our holes had frozen over. Not just skimmed over with a thin layer of ice, they were completely frozen solid, like they'd never been cut. "That's impossible," Jake said. "These holes were 8 inches across yesterday. Water doesn't freeze that fast, especially not 3 feet deep." Dr. Chen used an ice thickness gauge to measure the frozen over holes. The ice was 3 feet thick all the way through, exactly the same as the surrounding ice. "This ice formation would take weeks to develop," she said. "There's no way this happened overnight." I told her about the creatures we'd seen. I described their appearance in detail: the pale green skin, the black eyes, the needle teeth, the webbed claws. "There's no known Arctic species that matches that description," she said. "No marine mammal, no fish, nothing in the scientific literature." But she seemed troubled by something. "However," she said, "your description does match some Inuit legends I've heard about." When I got home, I spent hours researching online. I found stories about creatures called qualipiluit in Inuit folklore. The descriptions matched exactly what Jake and I had seen. According to the legends, qualipiluit are sea creatures that live under the ice. They hunt humans, especially fishermen and hunters who work on the ice. The stories say they drag their victims underwater to cities beneath the sea, where the people become slaves forever. The Inuit elders describe them as tall, pale beings with fish-like features and long, flowing hair. They have webbed hands with claws and mouths full of sharp teeth. They can speak human languages, but their voices sound like water. Most importantly, the legends say they're intelligent. They're not just animals, they're something else. Something that thinks and plans and hunts with purpose. I found dozens of stories from different Inuit communities across Alaska and northern Canada, all describing the same creatures, all warning people to stay away from isolated fishing spots, especially in late winter when the ice starts to weaken. I haven't been ice fishing since that day. Jake quit fishing entirely and moved to Anchorage. He got a job working construction. Last time I talked to him, he said he still has nightmares about those black eyes staring up at him through the ice. I still work as a fisherman, but only in summer. I stick to boat fishing now, in open water where I can see what's around me. My income took a hit. Winter fishing pays well because it's dangerous work. But some risks aren't worth taking. The weird thing is, I keep having the same dream. I'm standing on ice, looking down through a fishing hole. Those creatures are down there in the dark water, staring up at me with their huge black eyes. And in the dream, they're not trying to grab me. They're waiting. Like they know I'll be back eventually. Like they have all the time in the world. Sometimes I wake up feeling like something is trying to drag me down into cold, dark water, and I swear I can taste salt water in my mouth, even though I'm lying in my bed 50 miles from the ocean. Dr. Chen published a paper about our encounter, but she had to frame it as unidentified marine life rather than anything supernatural. The scientific community doesn't believe in Qualipiluit, just like the Coast Guard doesn't believe in monsters under the ice. But I know what I saw. And I know there are things living under the Arctic ice that we don't understand. Things that have been there longer than humans have been fishing these waters. If you ever go ice fishing in Alaska, especially late in the season, remember this story. If you see shadows moving under the ice that don't look like fish, don't investigate. Don't try to get a better look. Just pack up your gear and leave. Because some things that live in the ocean aren't fish at all, and they're always hungry. My name is Mike Henderson, and I've been the night janitor at Fairbanks Elementary School for 8 years. But after what happened during the winter of 2023, I'm not sure I'm still Mike Henderson anymore. Sometimes I look in the mirror and see something else looking back. I started this job right after my divorce, when I was broken and needed something that would let me disappear for a while. Night shift maintenance paid decent money because nobody wanted to work alone in an empty school when the temperature hits -40 and the darkness stretches for 20 hours a day. In Alaska, winter isn't just cold, it's a living thing that wants to crawl inside you and make itself at home. Fairbanks Elementary was built in 1963, on land that should have been left alone. The basement extends deep into permafrost that's been frozen for thousands of years, and when you're down there at 3 a.m., you can hear things moving in the walls. Not mice. Something bigger. Something that sounds almost like whispers in a language that makes your teeth ache. The building groans differently in winter. Every night around midnight, the walls would make this sound like bones cracking, and all the lights on the second floor would flicker in sequence, like something was walking down the hallway. I'd check, but the motion sensors never triggered. Whatever moved through those halls wasn't warm enough to register as alive. January 12th, 2023 was the night everything changed. The temperature outside had dropped to -52 degrees, cold enough that the air itself seemed to freeze in your lungs. I was alone in the building, like always, but that night felt different. The darkness outside the windows wasn't just absence of light, it was presence of something else. I was mopping the second floor when I first smelled it. Sweet and rotten, like meat left to spoil in a warm room. But underneath that was something else. Something that smelled like fear. Like the scent of animals, right before they die. The smell led me to the basement, down concrete steps that were older than they should have been. The foundation blueprint said the basement was dug in 1963, but those walls looked like they'd been there much longer. The concrete was the wrong color, and there were marks carved into it that the fluorescent lights never quite illuminated properly. In the back storage room, I found a cardboard box that wasn't on any inventory list. It was wet with something dark, and when I opened it, hundreds of dead rats spilled onto the floor. But these weren't normal rats. Their bodies had swollen to impossible sizes, and their stomachs had burst open from the inside. White creatures, each about 2 inches long, crawled through the corpses. They had too many legs and tiny black eyes that tracked my movements. When they moved, they made soft clicking sounds, like fingernails tapping on glass. The sound seemed to echo from inside my skull. I called the district office, but the line was dead. I tried my cell phone, but it showed no signal, even though I'd had full bars upstairs. The basement was cutting me off from the world above, and something about that felt intentional. I should have left. Should have walked up those stairs and never looked back. But the creatures were already moving toward me, and when they touched my boots, I felt a warmth spread through the rubber. They were generating heat in a room that should have been freezing. I tried to clean up the mess, wearing double layers of rubber gloves, but the creatures moved with purpose. Some crawled up my arms despite my efforts to brush them off. Where they touched, my skin grew warm and then numb. Not painful, just absent, like those parts of me had simply stopped existing. By the time I finished and got home, I couldn't feel my hands below the wrists. When I looked at my palms under the bathroom light, there were no visible marks, but I could see something moving beneath the skin. Tiny shapes swimming through muscle and blood, leaving trails like dark veins. I went to the emergency room, but the doctor couldn't see what I was seeing. The X-rays showed nothing. Blood tests came back normal. When I described the creatures, she recommended a psychiatric evaluation. But late that night, alone in the hospital bed, I felt them whispering to me in that language that hurt to hear. They weren't speaking words, they were rewriting me from the inside. Over the next week, I tried everything. Different doctors, specialists, even drove to Anchorage to see an infectious disease expert. Nobody could find anything wrong, but I was changing. My reflection looked slightly off, like the proportions of my face were shifting. Food tasted different. I started craving things that weren't food. The creatures were learning. Each night, I could feel them mapping my nervous system, understanding how I worked. My memories began to feel like they belonged to someone else. I'd remember events from my childhood, but from the wrong perspective, like I'd been watching myself from outside my body. I researched everything I could find about Arctic parasites, but the scientific literature had gaps. Pages that should have existed were missing from medical journals. Government databases returned error messages. It was as if someone had systematically removed information about certain organisms that weren't supposed to exist. That's when I found the old trading post records in the Historical Society archives. Fairbanks Elementary wasn't built on empty land. It was built on a mass grave from 1847, where Hudson's Bay Company traders had buried the bodies of an entire Gwich'in village that had died of something they called the hungry darkness. The company records described symptoms identical to what I was experiencing. People whose skin stopped belonging to them, families who woke up as strangers wearing familiar faces, children who spoke in voices that weren't their own. The traders had burned the village and buried everything beneath 6 feet of permafrost, thinking the cold would kill whatever had infected the people. But they were wrong. Cold doesn't kill things like this. Cold preserves them. When I returned to the school, I understood why. The basement hadn't been dug in 1963. They'd simply removed the ice from a burial chamber that was already there. Every winter for the past 60 years, the building's heat had slowly thawed the permafrost, releasing what should have stayed frozen forever. I went back to that storage room, but the box was gone. In its place was a hole in the concrete floor, perfectly round, leading down into darkness that seemed to swallow my flashlight beam. The walls around the hole were covered in markings that hurt to look at directly. As I stood there, I realized I wasn't alone. Other figures stood in the shadows, people I recognized from missing person reports over the past decades. Night janitors, security guards, maintenance workers, who'd simply vanished from their jobs. They were all there, but they weren't themselves anymore. They welcomed me with smiles that were too wide, in voices that layered over each other like a chorus. They explained that the hungry darkness needed caretakers, people to maintain the building and feed it new warmth when the opportunity arose. The job paid well because the previous employees never quit, they just became something else. I tried to run, but my legs moved differently now, like they were consulting with something before obeying my thoughts. The creatures hadn't just infected me, they'd been preparing me to join the staff. That was 6 months ago. I still go to work every night, still clean the classrooms and maintain the building. The school district thinks I'm doing an excellent job. They've even given me a raise. But I'm not Mike Henderson anymore. Mike Henderson is still in here somewhere, screaming from behind, eyes that don't belong to him, watching as something else wears his face and lives his life. During the day, I smile at my ex-wife when I pick up my kids. I attend their school plays and parent-teacher conferences. Nobody notices that my handwriting has changed or that I sometimes forget which child is which. The things living inside me are patient. They're learning about the surface world through me, understanding how to move among the living without being detected. Each winter, they grow stronger. Each winter, the darkness gets hungrier. And sometimes, late at night, I feel them looking through my eyes at my children, measuring them, wondering if they might be the right size for new homes. The elementary school is hiring a new day janitor. The pay is excellent, and the work isn't difficult. They just need someone who doesn't mind working alone in an old building with a basement that's a little too quiet. If you're reading this, don't apply for that job. Don't even drive past the school after dark, because Mike Henderson is still down there in the basement, and he's not alone anymore. And he's so very, very hungry. Asterisk, based on actual reports from Fairbanks Elementary School maintenance staff, 1,963 to 2023. 7 custodial employees have disappeared over 6 decades with no evidence of foul play. The building remains operational, and the night maintenance position continues to see regular turnover. My name is Jennifer Martinez, and I never should have taken that job in Alaska. I was running from something back in Seattle, a messy divorce that cost me everything, including my house and my relationship with my teenage daughter who chose to live with her father. At 34, I found myself starting over with nothing but a security guard license and 12 years of experience keeping other people safe while my own life fell apart. The job posting for Alaska Native Medical Center in Anchorage seemed like a gift. Night security, good pay, and far enough from Seattle that I could disappear completely. What I didn't know was that some places hold on to their secrets, like ice holds onto the ground, deep, cold, and permanent. Alaska in January is a different kind of darkness. It's not just the absence of light, it's the presence of something else. The sun barely shows itself, and when it does, it's weak and distant, like it's given up trying to warm this place. The cold isn't just weather. It's a living thing that gets into your bones and stays there. The Alaska Native Medical Center sits on a hill overlooking Anchorage, a massive building that serves Native communities scattered across hundreds of thousands of square miles. People fly in from villages so remote they don't appear on most maps, bringing with them stories and traditions that stretch back thousands of years. The building itself is modern, all glass and steel and the latest medical equipment, but you can feel the weight of older things pressing against its walls. My supervisor, Mike Thompson, had been there since the hospital opened 15 years ago. He was Tlingit, born in Juneau, and he'd seen enough to develop what he called a healthy respect for things that don't belong in medical charts. This land has a history, he told me during my first day of training on January 10, 2024. Before this hospital, before the city, this was marshland that flooded every spring when the ice broke up. Water would come rushing down from the mountains, mixing salt and fresh, creating temporary lakes that disappeared as fast as they came. He showed me the security system. 32 cameras covering every hallway, entrance, and major room. The control room was in the basement, surrounded by mechanical equipment and old storage areas that dated back to when the hospital first opened. Most of this basement isn't used anymore, Mike explained, gesturing to a series of locked doors. Old morgue, abandoned surgical suites, storage rooms full of outdated equipment, but we still patrol down here because sometimes... He paused, looking at the camera feeds showing empty hallways. Sometimes people get confused. Patients, family members, they wander down here looking for things that aren't there anymore. The job seemed straightforward. 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Patrol every hour, monitor the cameras, and maintain what Mike called professional calm, no matter what I encountered. The pay was $43,000 a year, more than I'd ever made in security, and it came with health insurance and a small apartment in staff housing. What I needed was stability. What I needed was to prove I could still take care of someone, even if it was just keeping a building safe. What I needed was to stop waking up at 3 a.m. thinking about my daughter Emma, wondering if she even remembered my phone number. The winter of 2024 was particularly brutal, even for Alaska. Temperatures hadn't risen above 0 in 3 weeks, and the snow kept coming in waves that buried cars and made the roads impassable. The hospital felt like a fortress against the cold, but also like a trap. Once you were inside, leaving meant facing something that could kill you in minutes. January 15th started normally. I clocked in at 10 p.m., did my first round, and settled into the rhythm of watching the camera feeds. The building had its own sounds at night, heating systems cycling on and off, the distant hum of medical equipment, occasional footsteps from the nurses making their rounds. I was learning to distinguish between normal sounds and ones that meant trouble. Around midnight, I got a call from Sarah, the night nurse on the pediatric floor. "Jennifer, we've got a situation up here. Family from Bethel just flew in with their 6-year-old daughter. Bad case of pneumonia, and the little girl is, well, she's scared. Really scared. It keeps talking about something following her from the village. Need me to do anything special? I asked. Just keep an eye out. Sometimes kids get confused in a big building like this, especially when they're running a fever. Traditional medicine and modern medicine don't always mix well in their minds. I made a note in my log and continued my rounds. The pediatric floor was on the 3rd level, and it always felt different from the rest of the hospital. Brighter colors, cartoon characters on the walls, and a kind of gentle sadness that comes from sick children trying to be brave. At 2 a.m., I was doing my hourly patrol when I heard the crying. It started soft, just a child's quiet sobbing that seemed to drift down the hallway like a whisper. In a children's hospital, crying isn't unusual, but this sound was different. It had an echo to it, like it was coming from somewhere much larger than a hospital room. I followed the sound toward the family waiting area at the end of the hall. This was where parents spent long nights when their children were in surgery or intensive care. During visiting hours, it was full of worried families sharing coffee and stories. At night, it was supposed to be empty. That's where I found her. A small native girl, maybe 6 years old, sitting alone in one of the chairs. She was wearing traditional clothing, a dark blue dress with intricate beadwork that caught the dim hallway lighting. Her long black hair hung like a curtain over her face, and her shoulders shook with each quiet sob. "Hey there, sweetheart," I said, kneeling down to her level. "Are you okay? What's your name?" She didn't respond, just continued crying in that soft, heartbreaking way that made me think of Emma when she was small and afraid of thunderstorms. "Can you tell me your room number? I can take you back to your parents." Still nothing. I could smell something strange. Not the usual hospital odors of antiseptic and cleaning supplies, but something organic. Salt air and seaweed, which made no sense 50 miles from the ocean. I keyed my radio. "Sarah, this is Jennifer. I've got a little girl in the family waiting area on 3. She seems to be alone and won't talk to me. Can you check if any of your patients are missing?" Sarah's response came back quickly. "I just finished rounds, Jennifer. All our kids are accounted for and in their rooms. Are you sure there's someone up there?" I looked back at the girl. She was still sitting there, still crying, but something about her posture seemed wrong. Too still, like she was listening to something I couldn't hear. "Yeah, she's right here. Traditional dress, about 6 years old. Maybe she's with a family member who's visiting?" "All visiting hours ended at 9 p.m., Sarah replied. "No one's allowed in patient areas except staff and patients. I'm coming up to check." But before Sarah could arrive, the little girl stood up. She moved slowly, like she was much older than she appeared, and began walking toward the emergency exit stairs. Her footsteps made no sound on the linoleum floor. "Wait, honey," I called after her. "You can't go that way. Those stairs are for emergencies only." I followed her, but she was moving faster than seemed possible for such a small child. By the time I reached the stairwell door, she was already descending, her footsteps echoing strangely in the concrete space. The sound was wrong, too light, too quick, like she was barely touching the ground. "Please, stop," I called down the stairwell. "It's not safe down there alone." My voice echoed back to me, but there was something else mixed in with the echo. A sound like water rushing over rocks, like waves hitting a distant shore. I started following her down, using my flashlight to navigate the stark concrete stairs. The stairwell was always cold, but now it felt like walking into a freezer. My breath began to fog, and I could feel the temperature dropping with each step. By the time I reached the first floor landing, I could hear her at the basement level. By the time I got to the basement, she was standing in front of a door that shouldn't have been open, the old morgue. Mike had shown me this door during training. It led to the hospital's original morgue from the 1992, back when they did autopsies and stored bodies on site. It had been sealed for over a decade, used only for storage of old medical equipment that nobody wanted to throw away. But now the door was standing wide open, and a smell was drifting out that made my stomach turn. Salt water, rotting seaweed, and something else. Something organic and ancient that belonged in the deep ocean, not in a hospital basement. "Sweetheart, you really can't be down here," I said, reaching out toward her. "This area isn't safe. Let's go back upstairs and find the nurses." That's when she turned around and looked at me. Her face was the face of an old woman, deeply lined with age, marked with spots and wrinkles that spoke of decades by the ocean. But it was still attached to the body of a 6-year-old child. Her eyes were completely black, not just the pupils but the entire eye, like looking into deep water at night. When she smiled, I could see rows of pointed teeth, sharp and serrated like a shark's. "Come play with me," she said, and her voice was the sound of waves crashing against rocks, of water rushing through underwater caves. See the city beneath the ice." She turned and ran into the morgue. But she wasn't running like a human child. She dropped to all fours and moved like a sea otter, fluid and fast, disappearing into the darkness beyond the open door. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get back upstairs and call for help. But I thought of Emma, of how many times I'd failed to protect the people I was supposed to care for. I couldn't fail again. I followed her into the morgue. The room was flooded with seawater. It rose to my ankles immediately, soaking through my boots and security uniform. The water was impossibly warm in the frigid basement, and it glowed with a faint phosphorescence that provided just enough light to see. Kelp and seaweed floated on the surface, moving in currents that shouldn't exist in a landlocked room. The child was swimming in the deeper part of the room, but she moved like a marine animal, time, sleek, fast, and completely at home in the water. Her traditional dress had transformed into something that looked like sealskin, and her long black hair flowed behind her like kelp. "The water is warm," she called to me, her voice echoing from everywhere and nowhere. "Come, swim with me forever. I'll show you the underwater city where the drowned children play." I backed toward the door, but it slammed shut with a sound like thunder. The handle wouldn't turn, and when I pulled with all my strength, it didn't budge. The door felt like it had been welded shut. The seawater continued to rise. It reached my knees, then my waist, then my chest. I could feel things brushing against my legs in the water. Not plants, but something that moved with purpose, something alive that belonged in the deep ocean. I tried my radio, but instead of Sarah's voice, all I heard were the sounds of the deep ocean. Whale songs that seemed to come from miles below, the creaking of ice under enormous pressure, and underneath it all, the sound of children laughing and playing in the crushing depths. The thing that had appeared as a little girl was still swimming around me, but she was changing. Her arms became flippers, her legs fused into a powerful tail, and gills opened along her neck. She wasn't human and never had been. She was something older, something that had been hunting in these waters since before humans built cities or hospitals or anything permanent. "I've been waiting so long," she said, her voice now purely the sound of rushing water. "Waiting for someone like you. Someone who carries guilt, someone who failed to protect what they loved. Your sadness tastes like tears mixed with seawater." The water reached my neck, and I could see things moving in its depths. Other shapes, other children who had been lured into water and never returned. They swam around me like curious fish, their faces pale and their eyes black, all of them wearing the clothes they'd dyed in years or decades or centuries ago. "Join us," the girl said, swimming closer. "Your daughter won't miss you. She's already learned to live without you. But we'll never leave you alone." I pounded on the door until my fists were bloody, screaming for help until my throat was raw. The water rose over my head, and I held my breath as long as I could, but eventually, my lungs forced me to inhale. Instead of drowning, I could breathe the seawater like air. That's when I knew I was already dead. But just as I began to sink into acceptance, just as the underwater children reached out their hands to welcome me, the door exploded open. Light flooded in from the hallway, and I felt hands grabbing me, pulling me out of the room. Hospital staff surrounded me: Sarah, Dr. Peterson from emergency, 2 paramedics, and Mike Thompson. They dragged me out of the morgue, but when I looked back, the room was completely dry. No water, no seaweed, no phosphorescent glow, just an empty storage room with some old equipment covered in dust. I was soaking wet and hypothermic, my core body. Temperature dangerously low despite the heated basement. My uniform was dripping with salt water that tasted like the deep ocean, and there were pieces of kelp in my hair that crumbled to dust when the paramedics tried to remove them. "What did you see down there?" Mike asked quietly while the paramedics worked on me. I told him everything: the old woman's face on a child's body, the flooded morgue, the underwater city full of drowned children. Mike listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious with each detail. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Robert, come here." An elderly native custodian approached, a man I'd seen during my training but never really talked to. Robert had worked at the hospital since it opened, and before that, he'd lived in this area his whole life. "Tell her about the kushtaka," Mike said. Robert looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. "My grandmother was Tlingit, from Huna. She used to tell stories about the kushtaka, shapeshifters that live in the water and hunt for human souls. They appear as children or as otters, and they can create water wherever they need it. They lure people into drowning, then drag them to underwater cities where they live forever as spirits." He gestured toward the sealed morgue. "This whole area used to flood every spring when the ice broke up. Before the hospital, before the city, this was marshland where the kushtaka hunted. The old stories say they're drawn to people who carry deep sadness, especially guilt about children they couldn't protect." I thought about Emma, about the divorce, about all the ways I'd failed as a mother and a protector. The kushtaka had known exactly what bait to use. "The thing is," Robert continued, "once they mark you, they don't give up. They'll follow you wherever there's water. A bathtub, a swimming pool, even a glass of water if you're not careful. The only protection is to acknowledge what you've done wrong and make it right before they can use your guilt against you." I quit that job the same night, packed my few belongings and drove straight to the airport. Used my credit card to buy a one-way ticket to Seattle, back to the mess I'd been running from. It took me 3 months of family therapy and 2 more months of individual counseling before Emma would agree to see me regularly. It took another year before she trusted me enough to spend weekends at my apartment. It's taken 2 years to rebuild what I destroyed, and we're still working on it. But I had to try. Because I learned something in that flooded morgue that night. Some guilt is so heavy it can drown you even on dry land. The kushtaka were right about one thing. I had failed to protect what I loved. But they were wrong about the solution. The answer wasn't to join the other drowned souls in their underwater city. The answer was to come back to the surface and do the hard work of making things right. I still work security, but only in buildings that were never near water. I don't take baths anymore, only quick showers. And every time it rains hard enough to flood the streets, I can hear that sound. Children laughing and playing in the depths, waiting for the next person whose guilt weighs more than their will to live. If you're running from something, especially something involving a child you failed to protect, don't run to Alaska. Don't run anywhere near water. Because the kushtaka can smell guilt like blood in the water, and they have all the time in the world to wait for you to come close enough to drag down. The only way out is through. Face what you did wrong, make it right if you can, and forgive yourself for being human. Otherwise, you'll end up like those other children I saw in the underwater city. Playing forever in the cold depths, never growing up, never going home, never getting the chance to make things right. And in Alaska's endless winter nights, that's the most disturbing truth of all.